Welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you for coming out today. It's a great day to be a Republican when you have a presidential candidate who's talking about cutting $1 trillion in year one from the federal budget. And I think we all know that's something America desperately needs if we're going to make it in the coming years. 5 federal departments Congressman Paul's talking about eliminating. These are the things that we structurally have to do if we're going to maintain our republic and bring home those troops that aren't used to defend the country but are used in more of a defense of other nations. So please join me in welcoming the Thomas Jefferson of our day, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you for coming out. This is very nice to visit with you today. I do have one member of my family with me today. My wife comes on many trips. She's not with me today, but I have one of our 18 grandchildren, and that is Lisa. She's sitting over here. But I do appreciate you coming out, and of course I consider what we're doing right now as being very, very important, because our country has to make a decision on what we're going to do in the coming future, the near future. It used to be a distant future, but now it's the near future. There was a thing that many of us have said, and I'm sure you have felt this way. You know, we shouldn't be giving this huge debt and this burden to our children and our grandchildren. But you know, I don't say that so much anymore because we're it right now. We're seeing the consequence of many, many decades of spending too much, allowing our government to grow, allowing our liberties to be undermined, allowing our military to do so many things it shouldn't be doing, and neglecting the things it should be doing. So for too long, we have allowed our Congress to act in an unconstitutional manner. We've allowed our executive branch to be unconstitutional, and the judicial system. We've gotten into this mess, I believe, because we have not had enough people who understood, believed, and took seriously their oath of office. If we have the right people in Washington and only elect a president and a Congress who sincerely believe in our Constitution, that is the only way I see us getting back to where we belong. Most of you know I'm a physician, and I went through medical school in the late 50s and early 60s. Went into OB/GYN and for many years practiced medicine. But even in my early years in medical school and medical training, I got fascinated with reading economic policy. Somebody said, well, why did you do that? And I said, well, it was sort of like a hobby. Some people go fishing and other things, but I just enjoyed trying to figure out why you have inflation, why you have business cycle, why you have a Federal Reserve, and became so fascinated. But those individuals who explained the free market, it turned out they were right, and they made a lot of predictions. For instance, way back when, after World War II was over, they devised a monetary system called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Nobody was to have a true gold standard, but we would have a partial gold standard. And our country was the wealthiest, and we had 707 million ounces of gold, more than any other country had ever held. So they said, well, the dollar will be as good as the gold, so all the other currencies will be connected to the dollar. And they thought that meant that it would be as good as gold forever. But there was one man by the name of Henry Hazlitt in 1944 when they set this up. He says it won't work. The governments will be tempted, in particular our government, to print too much money. And they did that. So more dollars were printed. We gave a lot of money away at foreign aid. The money went overseas. And the commitment was that anybody that turned in $35 could get an ounce of gold. If you were a foreigner, if you were an American, and you weren't even allowed to own gold. So anyway, that happened, and our gold supply went from over 700 million ounces of gold down to under 300 million ounces of gold. And that happened in 1971. Richard Nixon said, no more gold standard. He eliminated the gold standard with an executive order. And it was on that day that it dawned on me what age we were ushering in. And it was when I started talking out about the economic system. And that to me, I was convinced that the Austrian free market economists were right. The predictions came about. And it also indicated to us who understood this that without restraints on just printing money when you need it, politicians would spend money and then print the money. And that's what we've been doing for 40 years. So you might ask, well, they've done it for 40 years. It must have worked pretty well. The whole thing didn't fall apart. But it took us 40 years to get to where we are today. Because at that, in the early 1970s, we were the creditor nation. We were the rich nation. We had the jobs. We had the industry. And others owed us money. But today, our good jobs have gone overseas. We are a poorer country. Our middle class is poorer, and our debt is just unbelievable. Taxes can't be raised, even if you wanted to, because there's no money out there. You'll just destroy the economy if you try to do that. So we went from the richest nation as a creditor nation to a nation that owes more money than any country has ever owed in the history of the world, and the debt is the big problem. It's a worldwide debt. But it's all based on the dollar. The dollar is the standard, so everybody thinks the dollar can bail everybody else out. So we get to a point where a state needs bailed out, we bail out the states. Banks need bailout, we bail out the banks. Corporations need bailed out, we bail out the corporation. But the situation is such that those on the inside get bailed out, and the middle class gets stuck with the bills. And this is what has become very clear to a lot of Americans now. This was something we should put aside and say, well, we have debt, but we're still doing well. Well, it's not going to be that way any longer. So in 2008, when the economic crisis hit, people started to realize that this is unsustainable and something big is happening. So the system that was designed, the politicians are pretty shrewd. They spend money to get your vote, and then we won't worry about the payment later. How do they get the vote? Well, they always do good things, in quotes. They at least want you to believe they're going to. And I think a lot of them are very, very sincere. You take the housing crisis that we have. People really wanted people to have a house, which is a good incentive. I happen to believe if you want the maximum number of people to have a house, you ought to do it the old-fashioned way. Hard work, effort, pay, save your money, and build and pay for your house. I think that's the way we get the best. But no, we wanted an easy ride. So the Fed said, we'll create the money that you need. We'll pass out the money to the banks, and they can make these loans. And the loans will be guaranteed. Then it got out of control. The banks started speculating. They had derivatives, and there was gambling going on, and they got, they created a housing bubble. But when you pump a lot of money into an industry, people may get houses, but also the prices go up. Initially, people say, well, that's wonderful. My $100,000 house is worth $150,000, so I'll go out and borrow more money. So the whole thing went on for 20 years or so. So there was an obvious bubble there. So the bubble burst as was predicted, and guess what happened then? The people who were doing the most to gamble and making a lot of money, Wall Street, the big companies and the banks, they said, you know what? You better bail us out because there's a crisis coming, and there'll be a depression if you don't bail us out. So Congress rushes in, spends $1 trillion, Federal Reserve creates more money, and they bail out Wall Street. They bail out big corporations to the tune of trillions of dollars. And after they did that, the very people that were supposed to be helped with this program, the people who were supposed to get a house, they lost their jobs. They lost their houses, their lives and their mortgages. Our jobs are overseas, and it's unsustainable now. So this whole thing, even if the people were the best, they were very well intended, if it's a failed policy, this is what we get. I connect the economic problems along with our monetary system because government grows and we can get away with it with this idea that government can create money. This is why I have talked so much about the Federal Reserve. This is why I've worked so hard on auditing Federal Reserve. And I am very pleased to tell you, with a lot of help from people like you, we were able to get